So, without further ado, I want to capitalize on all our time because I love your backstory. I love what you're doing. So, John, thank you so much for taking some time out for the show today. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me here.
You bet. So before we got on, we were just kind of talking about the state of the world. And one of the things, and this is the question I always start with, is COVID. 6 years ago, it changed our worlds, everything about it. How did you get through that era, and how has it influenced and changed the way that you live and tell stories today?
How interesting. When the pandemic started, I was amongst the people who invested a huge amount of faith in this being a pattern interrupt that really could suspend some of the old ways that we have of operating in the world collectively, mostly at a social, global, political level. I could see the opportunity for an interrupt and a restart based around some of the things we were beginning to see. The pandemic showed us how important personal relationships are. It showed us the value of care for people that can't help themselves. And there was this lovely moment of hope. And I remember seeing a little expression on the internet of people who were going to make films about the new reality, the new normal that we can invent after the pandemic. And sadly, over a couple of years, certainly in this country, it became a political football. Your point of view about whether to wear a mask or whether to be vaccinated or how to deal with a public health emergency all became politicized. And I think in the end, the pandemic served for me to um, underline and reinforce some of the resignation that we have as citizens here in the US, resignation about the likelihood of real change that will move us forward. On a personal note, the pandemic was isolating. I mean, we all isolated, and I noticed. I have to tell you, Joe, I haven't completely bounced back from that
Yeah.
to meeting in person. I belong to a men's group with 12 other men in this area, and we moved to Zoom when the pandemic started, and we're only just coming back to having some in-person meetings as well. We still
Yes.
do the majority of our meetings by Zoom. So just ways in which we became more separate and more isolated. And I don't think that's a good thing in our culture either.
No.
So gosh, what an interesting question you asked. There's my answer.
You just dusted off a book jacket that I hadn't thought about for a while. My mother-in-law recommended this group on Saturdays, and it was a sketch group, and it was just all these people would meet at locales in Kansas City and just start sketching a said place. We'd all be in one area, and it
Hmm.
was so much fun, but it was an in-person thing, and I just remembered we don't do that anymore because for a few weeks we did it and it was so much fun. Like, I'm used to doing art and doing all that, but my wife and my mother-in-law, they don't really do it, but they loved it. They were like, I was doing this new thing, and we were all talking, and we'd come together and we had this share. But that was prior to the pandemic, and I haven't seen it resurface. But it's those things where we fall into these lulls. So let me ask you this. At the essence and core of what you do on a daily basis, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day. You're in a school, and the kid in the back of the room is like, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
I help people to find the magic that you've got inside. All of you, and I'm looking around a room of 12-year-olds here, every one of you has got inside you the capacity to be wonderful at what you put your attention to, the capacity to be a great friend, a great son, daughter, brother, sister. You've got the capacity to be smart and to enjoy life to the max. And the only thing that's stopping any of us from doing that is the stories that we tell ourselves. And so, kids, we have to pay attention to the stories we tell ourselves or the stories that are being told to us about whether I'm good enough, whether I'm lovable, whether I can if I put my mind to it. When we pay attention to those stories, we've got far more power than we think we have. And my work is helping people find that inner power. That's what
When
it's about.
when did you find that magic in you? When did you realize you had that?
I'm still uncovering it. That's the honest truth, Joe. But I mean, I can remember a couple of things. When I came out of university, I joined a multinational corporation and I was working there. And I remember the first time I went on what was called a training program. I was like, what's the training about? And I can't remember exactly what the subject was, but in that training, I realized that my life doesn't have to be the way it always has been.
Yeah.
I suddenly discovered that I'd got the levers, or I think we say levers over here, don't we? I got the levers to my life. I had agency, and I fell in love with the whole process of personal development back then in my mid-20s, and I've been involved in the field of development and transformation ever since. So, so I'm constantly peeling back the layers to find who I actually am, and so it's not work that's finished. It's work in progress.
So what did you want to be at 12 years old? What was your dream gig?
Um, somewhere I just finished a period where I was going to be a really famous soldier.
Okay.
Um, and then I was just coming towards the period of time when I actually fancied myself as a kind of business tycoon. And I
Okay.
was somewhere in between the two of those, I think, at that age. Yeah.
So take me back to your beginnings. What were these seeds that were planted early on in your life that made you want to help people get to that place where they can wire their own narrative? Imposter syndrome won't get in the way. They can wonder as much as they want. What happened in your life, as you say, peeling back the layers? What happened
Yeah.
early on that made you have this vision?
Well, I thank my parents for a number of things, and key amongst them, I think, was the absolute unshakable principle that we need to attend to the common good rather than just our own personal interest, self-interest, looking after number one, or even just looking after me and my family. There was always the common good was always in sight. My parents had a strong Christian practice, and so there was an awareness of a bigger picture. There was a sense of contributing to it. My parents were both teachers, so the vocation to help beyond, I mean, nobody goes into teaching to get rich
Yeah,
or even to be popular.
yeah.
Sometimes so there's a vocational heart. And I think I inherited that and an eye for the common good. And those have been playing in me ever since.
So, who would you consider your inspirational forces to allow you to evolve to this place in your life where you're helping others?
Gosh, it's interesting that when you ask that question, the first place I go to is the grounded wisdom of the indigenous elders that I've been lucky enough to spend time with and learn from.
Yeah,
And I can think of particular teachers, but it's almost that I want to just honor the traditions that have been alive on this earth for centuries, which are showing us models for how to live more congruently, more authentically, in balance with the amazing world that we live in,
yeah,
which gifts you and me air to breathe and water to drink every single day.
yeah. The one thing that happens in our life that can change the trajectory and make us look inside and feel the magic and feel that we have control is the nice things that we do for each other. What's one of the nicest things that somebody's done for you? Just whether it's a stranger or a tangential acquaintance, what do you think was one of the nicest things done to you that changed the way that you lived or the way that you viewed this world?
Gosh, I'm thinking of a couple of things. One is um, people who've believed in me and seen me
Yeah,
and 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 said, John, you have something to offer, whatever the context that conversation is. They've encouraged me in it. And I particularly think of a mentor who's the man who actually is responsible for me moving from the UK to the US, who's also his name is John, and he worked for a non-profit here in San Francisco. I'm living in the UK. I've just written a book called Your Planet Needs You, which is my version of a wake-up call for all of us as humanity to say if we carry on living the way we are, we're degrading the planet, we're falling apart collectively, and most of us are living quietly uncomfortable lives, if not worse. I'd written a book like that. John saw the book. He worked for a nonprofit in San Francisco, and he phoned me. He called me one day, and Joey, he said, "John, this is John." He said, "I've got one question for you." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What are you doing with the rest of your life?" And he invited me there and then to move to the States and work with that organization, which I did for nearly 10 years, and really put me in a place where my gifts were able to be contributing to a what I consider to be a truly worthy cause. So that was an enormous gift that he gave me right there, right then. And the other thing that came to mind is I've had hard times in my life, and I can remember I'm thinking of three people right now who sent me money when I didn't ask for it but needed
Wow.
it.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. People that could see into my life and care enough to offer me that very real help. So I've been blessed.
Did you ever have a dream of coming to America? I mean, coming over here, was that ever something that was on your radar?
I had a premonition, and I actually had I had a sense that I shouldn't. There was a certain point, I think the second President Bush was misbehaving in some of the ways that I consider he did. And I remember thinking, because I have a sister that lives in the States, I remember thinking, I'm not going to be a regular visitor to the States anymore because I don't align with that point of view. And then on a transatlantic flight, I heard a voice in my head, and I very seldom hear those, Joe. And this one said, "Pick up the in-flight magazine." I'm like, what? So I did. I opened the in-flight magazine, and I opened to the map page. And I was flying on an American carrier, and so the map page opened, and it was showing the wrong map because the real map, Joe, has Europe and Africa in the middle,
Uh-huh.
and it has the Americas over on the left and Asia over on the right. But this, I don't know who I was flying with, but they'd actually positioned the Americas in the middle, and Europe was over on the right, and Asia was over here. And I'm looking at this map, going like, this
Uh-uh.
doesn't work for me. What's going on? And the voice said, and I was looking at the States. The voice said, "You're going to live there,"
Wow.
and I said, "No way." And that happens so infrequently to me. I actually tore the map out of the magazine and kept it,
Wow, you
took it
should
with
have.
me. And years later, I ended up here.
That's wild. That's wild. So I'm curious, what have been some seminal books that you've read in your life? Who have been authors or books that have swayed you in the way that you've viewed the world?
Daniel Quinn's Ishmael.
Yeah.
That was really valuable. I read that relatively recently, like 15 years ago, but it really begins to point at the stories that we're living by that we've just assumed are true.
Uh-huh.
And so that was a key piece. If I go back earlier, there's a biography of a famous British pilot in the Second World War. And the title of the book is called Reach for the Sky. It's the story of Douglas Bader, a guy who managed to stay active in the Air Force, flying fighter jets or fighter planes in those days, despite losing two legs. Amazing man. So, yeah, there's a couple.
Yeah. I was just thinking, you were mentioning the second Bush. I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, Italy on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And I landed in Paris on the 4th. I was backpacking. I was in my 20s, just carefree doing my thing. And I was gonna leave, I think, on the 13th to come back to America from Paris to Kansas City. It didn't exist anymore. And I had to find a way home. So I went to London,
Right.
and the whole English way was exactly what I needed. It was the comfort that I needed. Everybody was so kind. Everybody was so understanding. They were trying to figure out Bin Laden, and they were trying to weave together this whole parallelism to the IRA and what was happening over there
Mhm.
earlier on, and it made sense to them. But the way they welcomed and embraced, and I miss that old world, because I feel like in our world now, levels of that camaraderie is eroding. But I always remember that when you were talking about the UK, it was. But I
Yeah.
will tell you, one of the weirdest things was when I left Paris. I went to the English Channel. I was taking back some gin and tonics. I come out, I'm a little loopy, and I get in the car for the first time driving on the wrong side. And every time I would like look up and figure out what I was doing, I'd be like, "What are you doing? Why are you? You're on the wrong side." And the guy was like, "You're fine. It's okay. Don't worry about it." But anyways, it was. I just remember. You always hear about our closest allies and our closest neighbors, and I remember being over there and just feeling the warmth, and it was wonderful. Getting my flight out of Gatwick and getting home, it was good. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is, do you ever miss home? Do you ever miss being back in the UK?
I do. I was there over Christmas and the New Year to see my kids who
Yeah.
live in one of them lives in England, one lives in France. Um, so I do. There's something about my connection to the earth that can't be replaced anywhere else, I don't think. And
That's
so if I get there, and we went to some of the mountains in North Wales, and something in my soul just settled in a way that it can't anywhere else in the world. So I do miss it. But there are also things that I love about this country and the people here, which would be extremely hard to replace. So I find myself torn. And I actually, if anybody asks me, where do you really call home? I try and change the subject.
yeah, right. I get it. Totally get it. So if you can meet one person on the planet right now and spend some time with them, have a conversation, have a lunch, somebody that might help you on your journey in life, who would you love to
Hmm.
hang out with?
Oh gosh, there's a guy called Gabor Mate. I don't
Okay.
know if you know him. He's
Us.
uh, he's been researching he's a psychologist. He's a survivor of the concentration camps. He's been researching trauma. He is one of the wisest, most grounded, most heart-centered men I've ever heard. An interview or a conversation between him and Cornell West is something to look out, because Cornell West is also, my word, it would be a delight to spend a minute in his company.
Oh, wow.
What a rich, rich, wise prophet he is.
He is.
So those are a couple of guys that I'd love to spend time with. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So with your clients, you probably have to swim through some things that can get murky to help people get to a better place. How do you ground and protect yourself and then make sure your soul flourishes every day?
Well, it's important. I think a lot of that is actually, I'm fortunate enough that I've been involved in this work for a long enough time that some of those practices and that orientation is fairly automatic in me. And I'm grounding by knowing that for every difficulty that somebody's bringing and sharing with me, I've had a comparable experience of some kind, and so I can identify with them and what they're going through in a way that I don't, I'm not being presented with a horrible difficulty, more of here's a situation we're going to explore. I'm not sure if that makes a deal of sense, but
It does.
and the other thing, and the brand I have working with men is called Whole and Free, and I chose that very, very deliberately because I believe each of us, Joe, have wholeness in us. What we sometimes lack is the capacity to access it. But I think you're a dad, aren't you?
Yes.
So you've looked into the eyes, I guess, of newborn babes, and you've seen. I don't know anybody that will deny that there's a hint of divinity to be seen in the eyes of newborn children, and we see in them the capacity, the wholeness that I'm talking about, the capacity to be alive and zestful and curious and courageous and compassionate and all the other inherent human qualities that we have. They live inside that child. They live inside you. They live inside me. They live inside everybody listening. And then we get exposed to the world, which helps us learn stories about who we are, who we're not, what's right, what's wrong, what the world is, what it isn't. And we all these stories come in and as they're accumulating, we lack the capacity to filter them effectively.
Yeah.
And some of them log as the operating system. And before we know it, we've got an operating system we didn't choose, we can't see, and we don't know is operating us. And that's when we're stuck living in stories. And I particularly look at the stories that men are brought up in and the stories that we have to work with and escape from if we choose to. And that's the process of coming free. So in working with people, whatever they bring, I'm reminding myself of the wholeness that exists there and the capacity for freedom when people have the courage and the tools to strip back the stories that don't work.
So when you see the big word retirement flash up mentally in your mind, what do you think about? What's retirement make you think about?
You've got some great questions. Two things, again, they're quite opposing, really. Um, One is I love what I'm doing, so I don't know what I would do if I was retired, because I think I so love this that I would want to continue
Uh-huh.
to be somehow involved in helping people in the process of gaining more options in their life. Um, but the second thing that comes up is, yikes, I can't afford to yet.
That's the loud voice in your head. I get it. So, the one thing that's interesting about being alive is that we come from all these generations in our own bloodline that go way, 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 way back. If you had the chance to go back in time and run into the very first people in your bloodline lineage and you could
Mm,
ask them a question or a few questions, what
yeah.
would you want to know about the beginnings of the bloodline that brought you and your children into this world?
I've done a lot of work around that, Joe. I can picture my lineage back in the islands of Britain, and I would want to know, I want to know what was the point at which we abandoned the sacred. You see, I think if we go far enough back in any tradition, where my lineage, yours, everybody's, we reach a place that people were living in active daily communion with the sacred. Life is sacred.
Yeah,
If you've ever had to depend on a crop to eat, if you've ever had to depend on the weather being good so that you can survive, and most of us haven't had that experience, you know life to be a sacred mystery and you live in reverence to it. And at some point as human beings, we dropped away from that orientation. We began to see life as something we could somehow understand and master, and the planet as something that's here for just to supply us with what we need. So I'm super curious about that particular moment of diversion when
yeah,
when we
that's
when we
beautiful.
left the fold. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to stay in this mythical realm, this mystical realm, so to speak. If you had a dream tonight and you ran into this 16-year-old version of you and you
Mhm.
walked into a room and there was an old film projector and you clicked play on it and it showed a highlight of your life in like 60 seconds. And you looked down at that young version and said, "That's the life you've lived so far." Would that young version of you believe it?
Would he believe it? I don't think he would, in the sense that at 16, I was being coached in quite an orthodox direction by my folks.
Yeah.
Do well at school, get to a good university, get a good job. And I did all of those things. And it wasn't, no, it wasn't in my teens. It wasn't even in my 20s that I began to see the adventure of life. And then I left the big corporation in my late 20s, decided I was going to be a trainer, and that was when I really started to shape my life. And that took me then to live. I've lived in on three different continents. I've written two books. I've spoken on six different continents around the world. I've lived in the jungle. I've lived in the mountains. I've had an amazingly rich variety that was completely invisible to the 16-year-old me.
You know, when I was in my late 20s, I was at a job in corporate America. I was in an architectural engineering firm. And for some convoluted reason, they had to let me go. And I remember it was the first time I got escorted out of the building. It was high corporate and all of that. And I remember I got out and I was a smoker at the time and I threw a cigarette in my mouth and I called my best friend. And I'll never forget what he said when I was on the phone. I was a little dizzy. It was a little bit daunting. I said I was just let go. And all I remember him saying was, "This is the first day of the rest of your life." And
Yeah.
it's like that. Like when you find this like epiphany, when you find this clarion call that comes in loud and clear, that's what you do. You just go for it. You
Yeah.
just, you know?
I've had that experience and I've had the opposite. Um, and I'm thinking specifically of a time that was really difficult for me. And there was a big setback in my life. Much of it focused around money. I lost a lot of money, and that put me in a place of feeling scarcity. I was in survival mode. And I wasn't able to adopt that mindset very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think I stayed in that uncomfortable and disempowered place for a while. And so, yes, to the people that are listening, Joe's reminder is really valuable, and I can reinforce the value of asking yourself the question, what's going to be possible now? What can open up out of this seemingly problematic situation that I'll be grateful for when I look back?
Yeah.
It's the beginning of something. That's a really useful orientation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, you bet. So of all of the things that you've done in life, this adventure you've been on, everything you've overcome and accomplished, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
The moments, I'm not going to select one because they're such rich moments when I've been able to create a space in which somebody can transform their own life. There is, in my experience, Joe, I haven't found a more fulfilling experience than being able to facilitate somebody's expansion, their step out of problem into possibility, their ability to put down an old story and move forward with a new one.
Yeah.
And I've been blessed to be able to do that in one-on-one situations as a speaker, as a teacher, and that's what I'm incredibly proud of, that I've been able to help people have more real, actionable possibilities in their lives.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone that's a client, everyone that you work with, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I know myself to be aging into a wise, kind, valuable perspective for the people I love and people beyond that. Yeah.
I love it. So if you walked on some magic carpet and you found a bottle and a genie came out and could give you the wish of going into the future to see what we do with all of this that's going on in AI and this technologically driven world, or you could go back in history and see one event with your own eyes, what would you prefer to do?
I think I'm forward focused in
Okay.
the answer to the question, and I think I'd like to go forward and find out. There's that quote, give me a lever long enough and I'll move the world. That was Archimedes that said that. And I think I'd go forward and I'd ask to be shown the leverage points that are going to turn the human experiment around. I call this an experiment in consciousness, the human life on Earth. I'd ask to see the leverage points where we get to turn this experiment around
Yeah.
and return to a sacred and sustainable coexistence here on planet Earth.
One more question as an addendum to that. Do you wake up hopeful with everything that's going on in this world? Do you
I
feel
wake up challenged. There's a deep belief that the capacity we have as humans it will right the course, put us back on course. I can't hold that deep belief present every day. Sometimes I look at the news and I despair.
we talked before we got on? Absolutely. I totally get it. So if anybody wants to, they have questions, they want to hire you, they want to reach out, any of the good business, let's get into the good business. How do they do it?
Okay, well, I have a website called wholeandfree.me, wholeandfree.me. That's where the work I do supporting men is showcased. And I have a website, jonsymes.com, where my work as a speaker and a consultant is showcased. So those are two places. I hope we can drop those in the show notes for
Sure.
folks. Um, and if you go to either of those, you'll find ways to get in touch with me. I'm always willing to chat, always willing to explore ways in which I can help any of our listeners to find new possibilities in their life. That's what I resonate with.
I love it. John, what a delight. Thank you so much. You shine. It's immediately evident. So thank you so much for taking a minute out and keep changing the world, man. It's good.
Well, Joe, thank you. I appreciate that acknowledgement, and I really appreciate the space you create for the shining that goes on.
It's been an
So
honor. It's always an honor. Yeah.
I look forward to